Hello.
Hi, Clary. It's Rose.
Hi, Rose. How are you?
Good, good. Give me a second to make my background pretty before
Nice.
we.
Now I just have to rename myself if possible.
Yeah, I was actually looking at that. I hesitated to answer. I was like, oh, I wonder if I distributed this
I
incorrectly.
don't know if I can rename. Let's see.
I think it's if you can't, it's not that important. You might not be able. I don't know how to do it outside the online settings, to be honest. Oh, now I can't hear you.
This is probably different from most Zoom meetings, so that's probably why I cannot do it because the way I would normally do it is not showing up. So, okay.
I don't think I even see it, to be honest.
Oh, really? Well,
Yeah.
my name is Kate Hawes here because I'm using my partner's computer.
Oh, that's who popped up when you logged in, but I don't see it
Yeah,
anymore.
okay. Okay. Well,
So
anyway, there doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it. So, but
that's fine.
anyway, yeah.
Great thank you for popping in a little bit early. I always like to double check that everything is working. So
Mhm.
let me just check the YouTube back end to make sure that's set up, but it should be.
Mhm. And I
And
assume I'll
then
just share my screen, right?
you should be allowed to in
Okay.
that.
Yeah, it looks like it.
Yeah, you're
Um,
welcome to test it out if you're
okay. Let's,
skeptical.
um, I will go ahead and try that.
Yeah, I see a lot of folders. It looks like my screen. Good.
Good. It
Uh,
does not look like mine because mine's really messy. So it's like really nice that it actually doesn't have to embarrass me.
but
Um, so does this look all right to you?
yeah, it's perfect. And you're in there in
Okay.
the corner. I'm
Okay.
just gonna check
Great.
one thing here. Sound is good. Uh,
So if people go to that link that you sent me, it will, when 6:30 comes, there will be something there that will allow them to like see it.
yeah,
Because
so it goes directly to um us,
okay, got it.
and then it's going to be archived on the same channel.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, and I have some like birthing imagery here, and
Wonderful.
yeah, I'm just not going to worry about it. I mean, I'm not going to say trigger warning because I feel like
You know, in my experience, the thing you think is the trigger is not the trigger, and it's the thing you don't think is the trigger
yeah,
is the trigger. And then,
right.
so I think, your description, your biography kind of made it clear.
Yeah.
And from that,
Okay.
um, I think the only thing I know that we try is if it's going to be like seizure inducing, then.
Yes. No, I won't have any like strobe effects.
Okay, that's probably the
Yeah.
only thing I would say yes, hard stop. Okay, yeah, okay, that's set up great. We're good there. And then yeah. So I don't know what you want to do. You have about 10 minutes. I think Margaret's gonna join with her class.
Okay.
So if you want to just collect yourself for
Yeah. Sounds
turn your
good.
camera off. Thank you so
Yes.
much for joining in. All right,
Perfect. Thank
cool.
you. See you
I'll be
soon.
here.
Okay. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Clarity. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm going to see if I can connect you to our speakers in the classroom rather than through the computer. Let's see.
So you need to do it through Zoom, Margaret.
I need to do it right through that microphone thing, right?
Yeah. Sorry if you knew that. That seems to be a mistake that people can't.
Well, hold on. Can you keep speaking?
La 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 la.
Okay. Okay, say something to me again.
Testing.
Okay, yeah, that's loud. Okay, let's see. That seems to be working very loudly. Okay. Sometimes the speakers in here are somewhat unpredictable. Can you say something one more time?
I'm here.
Okay, one more time.
Testing.
The problem is like the volume knob sometimes makes it go louder when it's supposed to go softer. I'd like to not deafen if possible. I actually,
once with the hot water.
What's that?
I said I had an apartment once with the hot water that way. It was the opposite. Got guests every time.
Okay, that seems to be does that sound fairly reasonable to you guys? Say something again about your apartment.
Testing.
Okay, I think that's probably pretty good. And hopefully I won't. It just like if I touch the volume knob, sometimes it goes kind of crazy in here. So I think we're good.
So I'm just going to let Clarity have a couple moments and we'll just start promptly at 6:30 because I think some people do. There are people that are joining us virtually. So we'll start at that time. If you want to, it's up to Clarity. If you want to either put your stop video or if you want to turn your computer around to the students, it's up to you. I don't know.
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I will turn the computer around to the students. Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to stop video for a second and get myself settled.
Bye.
I'm going to have you guys bring chairs up closer to the front of the room. Oh.
Do we know like if anybody's streaming it, like who they are, or is that not visible to us?
I could see quantity, but not specific.
Oh, okay. Okay, just curious.
Yeah, because there's no login.
Oh, wait, now I can't hear anybody. Is everybody muted or is our volume down again?
Is your volume down?
Oh, hello.
Try again.
I'm
Okay.
here.
Okay, back. Okay, that's good.
Excellent.
All right. Everyone's with me and we can get started. So I wanted to start off this lecture series for the students in the classroom and for clarity, just to kind of, and anyone who's logged in from our YouTube channel, that this is the second year of our department and college's Equity and Awareness in the Arts lecture series, which is a really exciting opportunity for the department to bring in speakers from outside of the regional area and bring in artists such as yourself that maybe weren't accessible to us if we had you to campus physically. But we're honored that you have some time to share with us virtually. And the series is really an opportunity to open up our students and the public in the Kutztown community area to artists that are grappling with ideas about outside of kind of the canon that we've been dealing with for the last 100 some odd years, and maybe focusing on things that are a little more dynamic. And so obviously when we were thinking about who was coming to speak, Professor Noel thought of you immediately. And so I'm very excited because I'm familiar with your work as well, that you accepted our invitation. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction based on your paperwork, and then I'm going to hand it over to Professor Noel to speak about her connection to you outside of this talk. So Clarity Haynes comes from New York, from New York City as a painter. She works on the body and queer feminist resistance and the archive. Her work has been widely exhibited and the Denny Dimin Gallery in New York, the National Portrait Gallery in DC, the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, and the Mana Contemporary Gallery in Jersey City, amongst several solo shows throughout the years. She received a very, very impressive Pollock-Krasner Foundation Award and has been a resident at several prestigious residencies such as MacDowell and Yaddo. Her work has been reviewed from an ArtForum, New York Times, The New Yorker, you name it. Her work's been spoken about, and it's really a great pleasure to have you speak to us about your work that I think you just had a show come down recently. Am I getting that right? I feel like you did just.
I've been in some group shows recently,
Okay.
but not a solo show. Super
Okay.
recent. Yeah.
So it's just really exciting to have you speak to us. You're really at this incredible moment in your career, and thank you for taking time out to share it with us. And with that, I'm going to hand you over to Professor Noel, otherwise known as Margaret, to speak about her connection to you.
Yeah, I wanted to just bring in my personal connection to Clarity, which is that we met when we were both in high school, when we were both part of Arts Week, that we were selected as candidates from what was then called the National Foundation for Advancement in the Arts, but is now known as Young Arts. And we spent a week in Miami together as high school seniors. And I was like really impressed and struck by your work at that point. And then I continued Well, actually, we fell out of touch, and we both were part of a panel at my graduate school, the New York Studio School, to talk about making a career as artists and artists in academia specifically. And at that point, I started following your work again. And Clarity, you might not know this, but I've shown your work in almost every class that I've taught. So when I was teaching primarily drawing, I showed your Breast Project series to my life drawing students. And then I've been showing a lot of your paintings to my painting students recently. So I'm really excited that you were able to join us today. And I'm going to mute our side, but could you let us know, would you prefer questions as they come up, or would you prefer questions at the end?
I think that if a question comes up while I'm talking, that's fine.
Okay. So if any of you guys have a question in the classroom, you would approach the screen here. I'm going to mute us, but then I can unmute for a question.
Great.
Yeah, and if there's any questions at the end, that's fine too.
Wonderful. So I am going to hand it over. I do want to stress to the students that if you want to be heard, you very much need to come up to the screen. Otherwise, it's very difficult for Clarity to hear you. And thank you, Margaret, for sharing that personal connection. I think that part of this series is also reminding the students that your career is long and wide, and also to behave nicely always, because people are around. And it's really wonderful to make connections when you're young, and then to find out you continue to share interests and you're excited by each other's work for decades, really. And so that is, I didn't know it was high school. I thought you went to college together. For some reason, high school is even more exciting. So it's really wonderful that you shared that with us and the students. Thank you. And without further ado, I'm going to mute myself and turn off my video and turn it over to Clarity.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Rose and Margaret. Whenever I see you, I just remember you as a high school student. Like, I can't get that out of my mind. I really wish I'd brought this photograph of us together that was taken that week. You know, it's such an impressionable time, and I still remember that too so strongly, like how exciting it was to be among really serious young artists. So I'm so excited to talk to all of you here tonight. Thanks to everybody who came. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen in just a second. Let's see. Here we go with that. Okay, so you should be able to see my screen. And okay, great. Oh, I see. Okay, so I'm back here. So yeah, so this is work from the Breast Portrait Project. And this is just an example of recent work that is a torso portrait. And it's larger than life. I don't know if you guys can see the whole thing, or if the little window is covering part of it. I'm going to try to minimize my window or put it to the side. Yeah. So this, you can all see. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show you two things that are very recent. This was 2020, and it is about 58 inches tall and probably 70 something inches wide, just to give you a sense of it. And another image that's recent is, oh, okay, so I have to do that. That's interesting. Okay. Having a little trouble here. When I do the little arrows, oh, here, I'm coming back now. Okay, everybody's getting a preview here. So here we are with this image, and then here is an image of a show that I had at Denny Gallery, which was then Denny Dimin Gallery in 2020, showing both some torso portraits, which, as you can see them in this space, they're definitely larger than life. And then the altar paintings, which are in the foreground, paintings of homemade personal altars that I make and then paint. And here is another example of work that was 2020, 2021, that was in a show at the Aldrich Museum. And these are shaped canvases, but they're still, I still consider them altar paintings. So you get a sense of the scale here from this photograph. So these are very recent. And I wanted to take you back, though, to 20 years ago, or even a little bit before 20 years ago. This was a painting that I did in like 1999 to 2000 of my altar at the time. I was living in Philadelphia, and I was actually a student at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. And I thought, I want to do something outside of school. I want to do something just for me. And I had a really fun time painting this because this was something that I put together to make myself feel safe, to make myself feel happy. I would light my candles, and this was an expression of my spirituality. And it had all of my favorite little things that I had found, artists I admired, little postcards people had sent me, things that meant something to me from my neighborhood, or things that I just, for whatever reason, liked the color or the pattern. So that was something that I did and then kind of never did again and forgot about until 2019. And this was another painting I did back in 2002. It is a life size, so they're slightly smaller, these torso portraits, triptych, painted in oil, called Breast Portrait Triptych. And now I'm going to tell you just a little more about that project. It's a project of torso portraits that I started in about 1997. And I actually started it with a self-portrait with the intention to heal my own trauma and my bad feelings about my body. And then I started doing them for friends, and then I started doing them for strangers. And then I met so many people through this, people that had undergone surgery or illness, or that's just one of the many, many experiences. I did hundreds of portraits over the next 20 years. Usually, and I had them sign this book as well. I have about 6 of these books that are a record going way back to 1998, where each person who sits writes afterwards how they felt about it, how they feel about their body, what is their story. And I would say when I first started this in the late 90s, I think breast cancer was a really big issue. There were many other experiences people shared, and often they sat for portraits as a way to transform something or empower themselves in some way, sort of as an experience that they wanted to have. But breast cancer was probably one of the biggest things, because at that time, it's hard to imagine this now, but at that time, there was still a lot of secrecy and shame around that. People were very much encouraged to have prosthetics and hide, and there was just a lot of sort of negativity surrounding it. So people who made the decision to get a portrait done were often kind of really putting themselves out there and taking risks and making a statement. And then in about 2010, I started doing large scale oil paintings of these for the first time, really at this scale. And this is an installation view from a show I had in Brooklyn called Radical Acceptance at Tabula Rasa Gallery. And that was the first time I ever showed these large scale paintings. This is
Clarity. I actually have a question from a student if you're
okay, sure. Mm-hmm.
This is Melody.
Hi, a question. So when you first started making these pieces, were you ever kind of scared to approach it and kind of tackling that fear? Did you ever have those moments where you was just wasn't sure how you was gonna approach the subject, or what to do, and just how to push through that feeling?
Yeah, I did. I'm not sure exactly in what sense that you mean it, but I definitely, it brought me into many situations with people who had had really intense experiences. And I don't know if that's how you mean it. I mean, in one way, I was very much not happy about finding myself doing this, because I was immediately known as the breast artist, which wasn't actually my choice. It was just, it wasn't my plan as a kid to grow up and be the breast artist. But is that what you meant? Or did you mean more the subject matter and the people that I was dealing with?
I meant the subject matter. For me, I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone and push to a subject of nudity and stuff, but I find that the fear or the anxiety of approaching the subject and where to start is something of questioning.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's always been a really interesting thing. I think that the paintings are definitely confrontational. And I think depending on the experiences people have had in their lives, they have very different responses to the paintings. And for myself, a lot of my reason for choosing the torso, part of it was the culture that I was involved in at the time when I started it, when I was in my 20s, which was queer, trans, feminist space in which there was a completely different sense of aesthetics. And there was a sense of everybody's body is beautiful. And there was a sense of people of all sizes and shapes and, you know, being proud and kind of claiming space. So that was the context of my personal kind of community at the time. And I felt, and it ended up feeling a little bit like by showing these bodies, I'm actually showing the people that I'm surrounded by that are also queer feminists, people that have questions about their gender, people that are proud about aging. You know, many of the values in that society, in that community, were like completely opposite of the mainstream values of society. So I think, for example, you know, I was often in spaces where people were had breasts and they weren't wearing shirts. You know, they'd be outside just not wearing shirts. And so I was kind of used to that. But often, like, people might look at it and say, oh, I've never seen a body like this, except maybe in the locker room at the gym, or maybe taking care of an aging parent. So I think it brings up a lot. And sometimes it brings up people's fears of aging or fears of anything, I guess, just the vulnerability of the body. And I actually welcome that. I want people to, I mean, I welcome whatever reaction anybody has, you know, and often the models that modeled for me had difficult reactions, you know, as well, or it was not easy for them to model, or they had sadness about some traumatic experience they had, or often they were just like, I'm so sexy and great, and I just want to have a torso portrait. So it was very varied, but, you know, it's very intentional too. And I do remember one time somebody modeling for me, and actually it was this painting here. The one on the right was the mother of a friend of mine. And I didn't know she had that scar on her stomach until she took her shirt off. And then she said, oh, just ignore that. I'm just posing because I had breast cancer, but you can ignore the scar on my stomach. And I was sort of like, can I ignore it? Should I ignore it? And I decided that I couldn't. And I asked her if it was okay, petals of a flower. This reminds me of a waterfall, you know, just kind of thinking of the body as more of a landscape. So for me, it's a sort of transformational experience too, of things that are unfamiliar about the body becoming familiar, and kind of transgressing ideas of what is supposed to be normal or acceptable or beautiful. And, you know, I'm interested in ideas of masculinity, femininity, gender identity. I'm interested in aging. I'm interested in pregnancy. I'm interested in people recovering from sexual violence, or childhood experiences, or ideas about fat. This is a portrait I did of a friend who was pregnant with twins, and the tattoo on her wrist is a tattoo that she got with her partner, which was based on these blue star tattoos that the lesbian community in Buffalo, New York in the 50s used to have, so that they could show that they were queer if they had their wrist in one position, and they could hide it or cover it with a shirt if they needed to. So yeah, sometimes it has to do with tattoos and people making a statement with their body about their values or their community. And the paintings are all about the same height. So there have been times when they've been shown like butted up against one another. So it becomes a polyptych, which I had never thought of it until a curator did that. And then I was really glad that I had made them all the same height, because I love how unexpected combinations can happen. This is Genesis Breyer Peorage, who recently passed away like 3 years ago, but who was a body-centric artist and musician, and who did several art projects that had to do with the idea of androgyny. And the most famous was they did a piece with their lover to try to, they got surgeries to try to look like each other. So there was this idea of becoming one with your beloved and also becoming one gender that was non-binary. So it was really exciting to get to do this portrait because Genesis, being a well-known person whose story was known to many people, it was a way of doing a portrait that people could really get. They could read the story on the body. That was already one that people were interested in and knew. And, you know, I became very aware that like these really are about telling a story that the body tells. And it's a different kind of portrait, different from the face, which is the way we're normally identified, more of a kind of private portrait. And also, yeah, around this time, I started thinking about like the necklaces that people were wearing and the tattoos they had. And this particular portrait, the person who posed for me made this necklace just for the portrait. And they were really inspired by the Genesis portrait that was in my studio at the same time. So I had so much fun painting all the little objects that were part of this necklace. The model's name at the time was Grace, but they've since changed their name to Aoyar. And yeah, they're a jewelry artist and they're very creative. And each of these objects means something different. And that was around the time that I remembered, I found a photograph of that altar that I had done, the altar painting, you know, from 20 years ago. And I realized I want to do that again. And I decided to set up an altar just to paint. And I did that. And I thought of the painting as almost like a portable altar. It's very much trompe-l'oeil, you know, it's trying to kind of really be realistic enough that you really believe this is it. And then when it's done, I can take the altar down, and then whoever ends up with the painting or wherever it ends up, they actually have the altar itself. And that was really fun. This was larger than my original one. It was actually the same height, 58 inches, as the torso portraits. And it has the altar paintings all have personal objects that I've made or that someone has given me or that, you know, means something special to me. Like in this one, there's this card in the middle that has the Venus of Willendorf and glitter and little flowers and stuff. And a really good friend of mine made that for me and sent it to me, you know, in like 1992 or something, you know, and I've had it all this time. And so it was really fun to bring that into this composition. So almost everything in these is made by someone that I know, if not by me. And with this one, I was thinking about winter and death, and the other ones had been based on the spring, the fall, the summer, and this one was fall into winter. And so, you know, this friend of mine, this amazing artist that I hope you all know who she is, named Brenda Goodman, lent me this bat, this taxidermied bat that she has in her studio as a totem. And so I painted that, and then the postcard below of the painting with the red triangle and all the little squiggly lines, that's a Brenda Goodman painting, and I had the postcard, and so that became part of the altar. And this is called Altar for Judy Chicago. The central part is is actually a collage I made out of Xeroxes of a Judy Chicago dinner plate. And this is called Altar for Femme Joy. And it's, I was thinking about the pink triangle, which was this sort of queer symbol when I came out during the AIDS crisis. And the idea of silence equals death and the pink triangle and activism. I was involved in the Lesbian Avengers, and ACT UP was prevalent. And so I was really kind of claiming that as a femme symbol. And there's a trans pin in it with the trans flag. And of course, just girly things that I wanted to celebrate and see if I could put them in a painting, which is where you're not supposed to, where actually years ago when Margaret and I were in Miami at this event, we had artists talk to us about our work, and the male artist that was talking to me told me that my drawings were too feminine. And I mean, when you hear something like that at age like 17, it says goes very deep. So I'm always trying to kind of reclaim my full self. This is called Birth Altar 2020 to 2021. And you might recognize one of the round object is actually a reproduction of a Judy Chicago dinner plate from the dinner party. And the hanging mask is called the butterfly mask. And Judy Chicago designed it in 2020 for when the pandemic was really just getting started. And I bought one, and so that became part of it as well. And also around this time, I started thinking about birth a lot because it was the pandemic and I couldn't have models come anymore. So I was sort of missing working with the figure. And I was looking at Instagram a lot, and there's a whole big birth community on Instagram. So for the first time in my life, I was able to see images of birth, which I've never really gotten to see before. I had not been very familiar with them. So that was, I found myself first I painted this, and then I started thinking I actually just want to paint the births themselves. So that became this new focus that started during the pandemic. So this is an example of one of those paintings. It's called Origin, and I have Origin 1, Origin 2, Origin 3. This is Origin 2. The reason I chose the name Origin is because of, I don't know if anybody knows this painting by Gustave Courbet. It is an 1866 painting called The Origin of the World. And it is inspired, it is actually a kind of a crotch shot in a painted form, which suggests but does not depict birth. So I thought I would, because this is a new body of work, I thought I would share something that I wrote about it so that I can be clear about it with you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. In Maggie Nelson's book of Auto Theory, The Argonauts, it is suggested that crowning images should be ubiquitous, that they should be on mugs. Every time I watch a movie in which there is a birth scene, I always hope they will show the birth, but they almost never do. I am obsessed with the Instagram birth community, in which photographs and videos of graphic birthing are shown in all of their bloody gore. It is rare to see birth depicted in painting with any kind of realism. Frida Kahlo's My Birth is one of the few examples. Recently, there have been artists who have explored crowning imagery in photographs, most notably Hedgie Shin and Carmen Wynant. And of course, inescapably, there is Gustave Courbet's 1866 painting, The Origin of the World, which implies but does not depict crowning, as well as Mickalene Thomas's 2012 rhinestone-studded Origin of the Universe, which replaces Courbet's white body with a black body. During the pandemic year, I was unable to paint torso portraits from life, my usual engagement with the figure. I guess it's not surprising that I found a new way to paint the body. As in the torso paintings, the body is fragmented, but in this case, it's an extremely close crop, a crotch shot. Like Betty Tompkins, who paints realistic, erotic images of genitalia in ways that engage with porn, I want to paint that part of the body, a vagina, the ultimate, lesbian feminist art cliche. But I want to do it in a new way. I want to show something coming out instead of coming in. I want to show blood and gore as part of the body, as part of the darkness of life's entry, like its exit from this earth. I want to queer the idea of birth so that viewers think not of rosy, cis, heteronormative motherhood, but of birth as conceptual, as something that many women's bodies can't perform, and as something that many bodies that aren't female are capable of. I want the scale of my crowning paintings to be both very small and larger than life, so that the viewer beholds the event of crowning as gem-like, sexy, precious, powerful, enveloping, disturbing, beautiful, and confrontational. So the circular canvas was something that, I started getting involved in around the time of the crownings, thinking about the idea of the portal. And another reason why the crowning was interesting to me, I think, was this idea of all the death during the pandemic, and death and birth are so up against each other in terms of what it's like to be present at someone's death or someone's birth. It's like outside of normal life. It's sacred. It's scary. It's emotional. So yeah, I've been painting a little bit on shaped canvases as well. And this is a painting called Altar for LC. LC being Liz Collins, who's a friend of mine and a textile artist, and inspiringly working with color and pattern. And several of these patterns in this are from textiles that Liz designed and gave me. And this is another, it's called Full Moon Altar, another circular canvas. And I'm just thinking about the idea of the portal here as well, and night and the moon. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, as many people experienced death, my beloved grandmother passed away in a nursing home in Houston, and I was only able to talk to her on FaceTime. And so this is called Altar for Edda. That was her name. And it was really a way that I was able to deal with my grief and feelings of powerlessness that, while she was sick and after she died. It's hard to explain why this is really about her, although some of the items in it remind me of her. But I was thinking about it afterwards, and I think that the nest at the very bottom of the diamond kind of signifies, this birth, right? And then at the top, there's this hawk or owl flying. And then it's almost like her soul is leaving the painting at the top. So it's like something about the life cycle, and maybe like the maternal lineage that I feel with her. She also loved animal prints. I mean, her closet was basically full of nothing but animal prints. So I had to have that little tablecloth in there for her. And this is an acrylic painting I made thinking about pattern, which I love, and also thinking about birth, and getting a little more into the idea of inventing, and just thinking about all the different, kinds of fluids and the different colors that you see present with birth, like in terms of there's yellow, there's green coming out, there's red coming out, there's white coming out. It's everyone kind of looks different. So I just made this, invented this, thinking about different kinds of crownings. And then I think there's something too about birth for me that has to do with, very differently from the torso portraits, which are based on observation. Birth, I think we think of very much usually as a very like heterosexual symbol. And biologically, this expression of, the egg and the sperm, and this kind of, it's very like it's seen very in cisgender terms usually. And so I think for me, I've never really wanted to give birth, but I've been in relationships with people who have wanted to give birth. And so for me, I think, I've never really seen family as being tied to biology or even any kind of, physical reality as being tied to our true gender identity. So I think of birth as being part of, for me, kind of like a queer imaginary, because in some ways it feels like something that I'm not supposed to have access to. So I find this really interesting. And I think too about just the idea of like being a female presenting person in the world, and people often they equate that with being a mother. So people's first thought often when seeing that I'm doing birthing stuff is, oh, is this because you've given birth or haven't given birth? Or, and it's like the idea that actually maybe I'm thinking about myself as the baby, not the mother, is something that I like to throw out there. And also I don't really love the idea of even using the word mother, although it's interesting to me in some cases, but I don't want to talk about these bodies that are birthing in gendered terms, because they're not, they don't all identify as mothers, nor are they identifying as women. So I want to try to get us away from that kind of way of talking about it. So yeah, this last image is from a series that I'm now doing based on that pattern acrylic series that's kind of made up. I'm now doing life-size paintings that are based on that. I've done this one. I have 2 more in progress, and I'm going to kind of, I think, keep going. And sort of, they're a mixture of imagination and different sources. And sometimes people give me images of birds that they, like a friend gave me an image that her father took a photograph of her own self being born. And I'm doing a painting of that. So I try to, even though I'm inspired by like images that I find online, I'm trying to kind of move into a place where I'm inventing and using images that have a more personal connection. But yeah, it's been interesting, and I'm going to have a show in the fall at Denny Gallery of just this work, like focused on the idea of crowning and birth. So that should be interesting, because it's the first time I will be really publicly showing like a solo show of this new subject matter. So yeah. Does anybody have any other thoughts or questions? And you can be honest. It's okay if you kind of, if you're not in love with what you're seeing, it's fine. Because I understand that it's not always what we're used to seeing, and it may be disturbing to some people.
Margaret, I have a question if no one in the class, can you hear me and see me? Is that working? I have a question about the idea that you put forward earlier in your talk about coming out of the closet or coming out as queer in a time period where they were using the pink triangle symbol, and how that language has changed in contemporary kind of queer communities, and how you either struggle with or don't struggle with that language changing around you, and maybe your work, I guess, how do I say this? How your own identity and your work may or may not change because of those cultural shifts. Is that a clear question?
Yeah,
I don't know
definitely.
if that was...
Yeah, that's very clear. I mean, I feel like, when I came out, it was 1990 and I was 19. So it was, and my dear gay cousin had passed away of AIDS, like while I was still in high school. So then I became very close friends with his boyfriend, who then died. And I came out, it's like, so I think I came out at a time when coming out and being queer was so much about death. And it was so much about grieving, and it was so much too about the body and its vulnerability. And I know that, and And it was also a terribly upsetting time of lots of discrimination and, you know, just refusal to recognize or celebrate like queer and trans lives. So I think that I'm very much interested in like, I'm interested in the fact that I was involved in this group called the Lesbian Avengers, which was basically doing performance art.
Yeah.
And it's so not very well known. Like, it's interesting to see the things that get remembered in history, you know? There were a lot of things going on around that time. There was the Riot Girl stuff, you know, I had connections to a lot of it, but the lesbian stuff is the stuff that really falls through the cracks. And I think that I'm interested in the symbolism of what queer activism looked like then. And I'm interested in the symbolism of what it looks like now. And I'm interested in sort of being an archivist, and this is where the archive comes in, of being an archivist of how the language changes and how the images change. But really there's a continuity through all of it too, in the sense that the things that we fought for then made it possible for certain things to exist now, you know, like gay marriage. Like, I never thought that would happen. You know, and set the groundwork for further, you know, progression. And so one thing I'm very grateful for is that the evolution of thinking around trans identity has progressed so much that the general public now has a vocabulary around that, which makes talking about my work a heck of a lot easier, because it was really hard in the 90s. I was involved in a lot of trans activism at a time when people, like in 1994, people don't even think it existed back then, but I was in like a trans march in 1994. And, you know, so, but yet when I would give a talk about my work, it would be really hard to like explain to people the nuances, right? Of the fact that, you know, a lot of what propelled me to actually interrogate the body through these portraits was my own interest in how gender doesn't align with the body, and how do people feel in their bodies? How do they, you know, like, how do they make decisions about what to do or not do with that body? And so it's super helpful that the general like vocabulary has evolved so much now that people don't just look at a body with breasts and say, oh, this is a cis woman, or this is a heterosexual cis woman, or, you know, it's like people can see, like, I've always thought breasts are not a signifier necessarily of femininity. And I've actually always wanted to get top surgery, and I never really did. And now I kind of like still want to, but like, there's different reasons why I probably won't. But yeah, so I'm really interested in the changes and the continuity, you know, between generations. And that's one of the things I hope my work kind of engages with.
I'm really happy you, there was so much in that answer that was interesting and amazing, but I'm very happy that you touched upon the word archive. It's something that I know resonates with my own work, but also I think a lot of our students, you know, they do have access to Instagram, what you were talking about, which is essentially a living, breathing archive. And so thinking about how you're taking, as you said, it's amazing what doesn't get remembered. And your work is really a fantastic opportunity for someone who's very knowledgeable of all these signs and signifiers of that language to dip back into the past, but then bring it together with contemporary language. And it's just really exciting to see somebody whose career arcs that, because a lot of times you see work that's either from here or from here and doesn't have that crossover. So it's really exciting. Thank you.
Thank you for that question too. That was like super exciting for me too. Yeah.
These talks are for Margaret and I as much as they're for the students, but
Right.
Well, I actually have a comment more than a question, although you might want to expand on it. But one of the things I find so interesting about your work is how beautiful it is, but it also is discomforting. Like it makes me uncomfortable, even as somebody that's seen a lot of graphic images.
Yeah.
And that balance that you're able to maintain between something that's like the colors and the luminosity and the surfaces, and it's all like the skin glows. And yet there are these like very violent images, especially the birth ones, you know, and they sort of maintain that balance between the beauty and the violence of this act that we sort of take for granted and is also invisible, you know, so.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's like one of those things I like to try to work within, is the idea of beauty and the idea of ugliness too. And you know, like with these paintings, I've been thinking a lot about blood, and blood is a huge like staple of subject matter in Western painting, right? Like, you know, Artemisia Gentileschi's painting of like the beheading of Holofernes, all of the Christ paintings with the blood dripping. And I'm actually reading about how obsessed people were with the depiction of blood, like especially in like Northern Europe in medieval times. There was this idea that blood was associated with like the piety of Christ's body. But then of course, there's this other side to it where it's like the female body that bleeds is considered unclean. So it's all really, and then, you know, another artist that I know does work about blood and sort of the AIDS crisis and ideas of queerness and contamination. And there's just so many meanings to it. And yet, yes, it is there. You could see it as violent. And then you think of violence against women, you know, which we all see, you know, all the time in TV shows and stuff. So, you know, like police procedurals, et cetera. So yeah, it's, thank you, Margaret. Like, I hope to be able to walk that line of like beauty and also confrontation, and yeah.
Margaret, is there anyone in your class?
I think you packed a lot of information in. I'm not seeing other hands. Oh, Kim has a question.
Hi, I was just wondering if you would ever do paintings of like that have to do with birth that include like other images like C-sections or like stuff like that. I feel like a lot of birth, like stuff about birth is like hidden from and stuff. I as soon as I started looking into birth, it freaked me out because like I feel like a lot of it is hidden. Would you ever like, think about doing up paintings that have to do with other people's stories or stuff like that?
Yeah, it's funny. You know what? Like, I've had some conversations with people about this, and in some ways there's this connection between this and the Torso Project, which is like people talking about their own stories, right? And I've had people who have given birth talk about their stories when they see these images. And I think it's also, you know, when there's not a lot of images of something, people are like, and they see that and they relate in some way. Then they say like, they want to see like, well, my specific story is this, would you paint that? But it's different because I'm not painting with models, right? And I'm painting only what I really want to paint, like as an artist for whatever reason. So I'm not interested in C-sections at the moment, but I am about to do a painting of a breech birth, which, you know, is when the baby comes out, you know, foot first. And so at some point it's sort of hanging out and it's like the torso and lower body are visible, but not the head. So that's something I'm going to do. But in general, I find myself not really wanting to go too far into like being a support for, or, you know, following people's suggestions about what to paint, because I think what happens sometimes is that I think that there's this weird thing about birth. It's seen as this like heterosexual cisgender thing that like women identified people who have given birth or want to give birth kind of own, and they have an authority about it. And I I don't want to get into the ins and outs of like what everybody's story is and what they want me to do, because I'm not here to illustrate anybody's experience. It's more about myself, just finding subject matter as an artist that I'm interested in, and I'm not that familiar with through my own life. So I don't think I will, unless I find an image that's really interesting. Like C-sections remind me more of paintings of surgeries. Like there's this gross clinic painting that Thomas Eakins painted, where there's all these people standing around and there's somebody getting operated on. But the reason why I'm interested in crownings more so, or breech births, is because it does involve the vagina. And I'm interested in how the vagina changes and becomes almost unrecognizable. Maybe it protrudes and becomes phallic. I'm really interested even in the birth paintings and finding ways in which the body confounds our ideas about gender.
Thank you. I think you've given us so much of your time, and this talk has been, just as Margaret said, so full. And I want to offer the students, artists are very busy, and I'm not saying they're going to reply, but Clarity's email is actually on her website. It's not as if it's a great secret and we found her under some insider loop. And if you're excited by an artist, the way Margaret became excited about Clarity's work years ago, and then once again when they spoke on the panel, seek them out, see if they're showing. If they're in a group show, maybe you can see a handful of their works. If they have a solo show and you're lucky enough to align with that, do that. Write them. Who knows? You never know who's going to respond. Maybe someone needs a studio assistant. Maybe someone just has a free moment in a day, is standing on a train platform and is going to reply. You never really know. So your generosity has been really, we really appreciate it. And we thank you for sharing your work and also talking about the personal kind of the backbone behind it. I think authorship is something that college students and artists like myself struggle with forever. So to hear that, and to hear another artist working through those ideas is really remarkable. And it's exactly what I think this series we're hoping to bring to the university. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clarity. Oh, sorry.
Bye.
Bye.